So my name is Casey Bell. I'm the director of tutoring at Grand Valley State University. For those of you who don't know who I am, who've never joined a Zoom call before, with me, I just have used for fun. Everyone had a pandemic hobby, and as it turns out, talking about tutoring was mine. So we've all found out that I don't actually have hobbies outside of work, but they've been really wonderful. For the last 3-ish years. Been on a bit of a hiatus as I started my new role at Grand Valley about a year ago, but I'm hoping to bring it back. Zoom, okay. This is being recorded in case you didn't get the notification when you started. We have a lot of people asking for this to be recorded and shared. So I guess everyone be on their best Zoom behavior. It will be shared probably on the listserv and the Learning Center Professionals Discord. So yeah, but I'm really excited to talk about ChatGPT and how we can potentially use this in our tutoring centers. I also like to start with a caveat of I'm not speaking on behalf of my university necessarily, or any organization that I might or might not be involved with. I'm really just doing this to foster a conversation. So just, to make sure all bases are covered there. So yeah, this is a pretty open format. There are 80 people here. So we might have to do like a to be continued later if everyone wants to talk. I don't know how many people are interested in talking, how many people are hoping to just listen. But yeah, so we're at an interesting time in higher ed. Just technology overall has really boomed over the last decade, really fast forwarded over the last 5 years. And now with ChatGPT, a lot of people in higher ed are looking at, that's a really great question, Dr. Loving, I can do that. They're looking at how we handle higher ed differently. And so ChatGPT is an open source AI. I'm actually going to put the link in the chat. It is OpenAI is the company that created it. And so, that only went to Dr. Loving. Let me try that again. So it is a AI software that basically you can give it some instructions and it can tell you way more than I ever thought possible. I have been playing a little bit around with it, and I just keep getting more and more excited about the opportunities here, but also understand why a number of people have some reservations about it. I myself am a former college writing professor, and so I can see where in a writing heavy course this could have really huge implications, because ChatGPT can write an essay for you, and do so fairly convincingly, depending on how much you give it. So I guess I'm going to start from a very basic baseline for just a moment to kind of show everyone what ChatGPT looks like, just so we have the same, at least basic knowledge moving forward. I'm certain there are people on this call who have more knowledge than me, and I welcome those people to also discuss it, because as excited as I am, I haven't played with it a lot. But I'm going to share my screen and show you just what ChatGPT looks like. Maybe. Here we go. All right. Can everyone see my screen? Cool. So this is what ChatGPT looks like. You join OpenAI, you have to create an account and then log in, and you can start a new chat. And so I've played with a couple, but I want to show you real time. So this is a fun one, not necessarily higher ed adjacent, but my wife is job searching. And so I did this for her earlier. I put in a job description. So I said, create a resume for this job. And so I'm going to have it do it again. Create a resume for this job, and I gave it the URL. And it wrote a resume that she can then just edit with her specific information. And it tailors it specifically to the job description. You can also give it your current resume and it can tie the two together. I haven't tried it. But like you're all watching, oh, sorry, I got my wait room here. You're all watching ChatGPT create a resume. And if you take a second to just like read a little bit, actually sounds pretty good. And so this is ChatGPT. And you can do things that I never thought possible. So I'm going to type in here, a recipe for a classic Victoria sponge cake. There are any other great British baking show fans out there that'll ring a bell for you. Here's a recipe for a classic Victoria sponge. There you go. It's just creating. And so it's really cool. But also can be, depending on what you give it, really interesting for completing homework. Students can copy and paste a homework question and get an answer. If you need to write a old style book report on The Catcher in the Rye, you can do that with ChatGPT. Now, sometimes it's better than others. I'm going to stop sharing. I've read some things written by ChatGPT that, frankly, if a student gave it to me, the chats, but my colleagues and I were having a pizza and drinks, and the data analyst made it write a sonnet that made me cry. It can write poetry. If you're struggling for the right words, it can create them for you. It's really interesting that we are at this kind of crux within higher education, that we have AI that can write for us, that students can put homework problems in, and sometimes they get it right. Sometimes it doesn't. We've actually had in our chemistry drop-in center, the coordinator of that center was working with a student who used ChatGPT to do their homework, and then they realized they actually needed to know the stuff from the homework. And what came to tutoring, which like really best case scenario there, but they said, you know, they didn't know ChatGPT didn't always get it right the first time, but usually the second time it got the answer right. And so students are already figuring out like what I have to do to manipulate this to get it to work for me. So yeah, I'm really interested. I have tons of ideas because I'm a big dork and I love this kind of stuff and how we can do that in tutoring. But I'm really interested to hear other people's potential experiences, questions. I don't want to dominate this conversation because I am not an expert. So I'm going to open up the floor. Because we are now over 90 people, typically I just like say, just talk, just say something, but that could get a little chaotic. And so Sydney's got the right idea. I'm going to say, raise your hand and I'll try to facilitate a conversation a little bit here while I also let people in. So Sydney, the floor is yours.
So often I've had instructors be very concerned about plagiarism and cheating, and generally how ChatGPT and other AI programs work. And I know there's a lot of issues with copyright out there right now with artistry. There are gaming companies who refuse to let their developers use ChatGPT because what AI programs do is they pull from everything on the internet and then generate something new, which inherently doesn't credit the original artist or original authors, and it can be very problematic. But as I've told to instructors, I'm concerned that this is going to become basically the new calculator. When calculators came out, math instructors and mathematicians didn't want people to use them because they thought that students wouldn't be able to think critically or come up with the answers themselves. And now they're used in day-to-day to the point where they're even on our cell phones. So what's important for instructors and learning centers is to figure out a way to incorporate it into study techniques and critical thinking skills, because part of the issue, like you already stated, was that since the AI is generating something new, it's not always generating something factual. So that comes into how do students look at what comes out of GPT or ChatGPT? I can't talk today. How do students look at what comes out of these AI programs and determine what's factual, how they can find that information, what can they do with that information to make it their own, and it can be used as much of a tool as it can be used as much of a plagiarism tool.
I totally agree. I think these are all really valid points. The chat is kind of blowing up a little bit, but it's very accurate that there was a question about, does it write all truthful information in the resume or does it make up facts? And so I think there is no such thing as truth or facts. This is a machine. And so it's taking the information you've given it and pulling from the internet, which we all know can be really great and can be really horrible. So we are all being reliant in using ChatGPT on being able to look at what it fabricated for us and say, this is correct, this is not correct. And so I think that's kind of the next step, is students are starting to use it. And so now it's, how do we use it critically? Because you can't just take ChatGPT for example, the resume that I had it create. It said that a results-driven professional with a strong background in space planning and analytics. That sounds really great for that job, but that's actually not my wife. This is a career change she's looking at. And so you have to look at the information and edit it to make it true for you. You have to think critically about it. And that's where the kind of teaching aspect of how to use it ethically comes in. It probably requires a date of birth for reasons of, they want to make sure that you're not a small child trying to do this. You also have to put in a cell phone number or a telephone number to get a text code for it. So a lot of people are put off by that, but a lot of people also aren't. Just given, like, if you Google my name right now, you can 100% find my birthday and my cell phone number pretty easily. So I'm interested, like, obviously we can have really large philosophical questions about how this could change higher education and what this means for higher education. But I'm interested in how folks might be thinking about using this tool or not using this tool, or what the implications are potentially for our learning center. Oh, Jamie, I didn't see your hand up there. Go ahead.
No worries, but that's a perfect segue, Casey, because that's kind of where I want to go with this. I think it's important, especially, and I'm just going on a lot of conversations that I've had with faculty here at my institution at Suffolk, that we need to get past the plagiarism and academic integrity discussion, because ultimately stuff's going to get written by AI and you're not going to know it, and there's no way for you to know it, and you can't catch it, and the AI detectors don't work. They think the Constitution was written by AI, they think Shakespeare was written by AI, and so we need to shift our mentality of thinking like, oh, I need to find ways of like catching my students when they're using it, and think more about how do we train students to use it. How do we build a more complex set of ethical considerations that go into our use of it? But especially with this group, how do we use it in tutoring? Because it is immensely useful in tutoring. You can have ChatGPT teach you lots and lots of things. I was playing around with it the other day, and in preparation for a panel discussion for a symposium here at our university, and I asked it to explain p-values in statistics to a fourth grader, and it did such a good job of. It was like, imagine you're really good at a game, or imagine you've been winning this game a lot, and you can't decide if it's because you're really good at the game or if you've just been getting lucky. So in order to figure that out, you played that game hundreds and hundreds of times and tracked your result each time. And it used that premise to explain like what a p-value is. And if your p-value demonstrates statistical significance, right, that means you were actually good at the game versus being just lucky. And so there's all these tutoring uses, but one of the things that I thought to do was, let me ask ChatGPT how it thinks it could assist tutors in a university learning center. And it gave me about 7 or 8 items on the list. I'm actually going to paste ChatGPT's response to that prompt in the chat, so you can see how ChatGPT is suggesting that we could have tutors use this. And I think everybody's going to have a different view about whether or not they would want their tutors using it for any of these things, like generating more practice problems. Sure, that's easy. Yes, awesome, do it. Assisting with brainstorming for a paper idea, I'd probably keep suggesting my writing tutors stay away from that, because I've had it generate paper topics, and I wasn't comfortable with how much of the thinking it was doing for me when I was asking it to generate paper topics. So, you all can decide what you would like to use and what you wouldn't. But I think we want to think about this as, I mean, it's definitely disruptive. It's for those of us who also teach in the classroom, it's definitely going to blow up the way that we teach, and we're going to have to completely redesign how we assess and how we teach. Especially, I teach in our first year writing program as well. So I'm completely blowing up my first year writing syllabus for the fall and starting over and doing things like have ChatGPT or any of the other large language models draft a paragraph. Now take that paragraph, put it in Microsoft Word, turn on track changes, and show me all the show me how you would change that particular paragraph. Okay, now let's reflect on what changes did you make? Why did you make those changes? And think critically about how we're engaging with the tool. And especially in a learning center context, I think it is just such a good tutor's assistant that we really need to be training our tutors on using it. But lest you get worried that your job and all of your tutors' jobs are going to be replaced with these AI language models. Number one, they can't develop a sense of human connection. So that's the number one thing that we all do that these robots can't do. But if you look at the disclaimer that ChatGPT put at the end of its response to my prompt, it says it's important to note that while ChatGPT can be a valuable resource, it is still an AI language model and may not always provide accurate or contextually appropriate answers. Okay, thank you for being truthful. Tutors should exercise critical judgment, verify the information provided, and use it as a tool to augment their expertise rather than relying solely on its responses. All right, and so learning how to use it in a learning center context is, I think, crucial. And then the last point I'll make is I think it's untenable to try to institute outright bans on student use of this. And I think if you do that, you're putting your students at a disadvantage against everybody else who's going to be competing in a job market, having the skills of knowing how to leverage these tools.
Thank you. That's really great. And I love that you're already introducing it in your first year, right? Because I think you're right. I think we can say, no, you can't use it, but that's not realistic. Let's be honest, they're going to use it. And also, what is the job of higher ed if not to prepare students for the tools they will have as in the real world and as they enter the world professionally. So yeah, it's really interesting. There are the chat's absolutely blowing up, which I love. And I love everyone sharing everything, but it's really hard to keep up with, so I'm not going to try. I highly recommend get in the chat too. But yeah, there are different AI writing tools that are better with citations. There are different AI writing tools that are better with conversational language. There are ways that you can utilize multiple tools critically to actually make it work really well for you. And all of that is to say, like, do we teach students to do that? Or do we teach them that they shouldn't? One thing I'm going to share, just because I can, one way that I'm really excited about this within the Learning Center context, but also within students, is I actually used ChatGPT as a study tool, so to speak, very fake study tool. And I just pulled concepts from classes that I haven't taken, and it's longer than I care to say. But for example, I asked ChatGPT to provide me with a series of challenging problems related to the Pythagorean theorem to test my understanding. And it did. And so, like, cool, it can create practice problems. I had it do a study plan for linear algebra for me, which is pretty cool too. So it's interesting in that it's not always we are asking it for the answer, and that is all ChatGPT can do. It created a spaced repetition plan schedule for me to effectively review cell division for better memory retention. So I don't think it's all just I'm asking it for the answer and it's giving me the answer. ChatGPT can create your grocery list. ChatGPT can do more than just provide answers. It can also provide tools. And that's pretty cool. So I just want to open everyone's mind a little bit to that, because it does seem that there's a little bit of a misunderstanding about the limitations or lack thereof with ChatGPT. Travis, you did have your hand up and it went down, and I don't know if you did that or if it just did that on its own.
Sorry, I did that. It's not important anymore.
And one way I actually really liked this is, you know, for example, all of my degrees, every single one of them are English based. And sometimes I have a desperate student who needs help in a subject that I'm not comfortable tutoring. And this could be really helpful to get me up to speed on something that I haven't talked about or thought about in 15 years. You can use this as a tool for the Feynman technique to say, hey, explain, what did I do earlier? I think I did something with physics in the simplest terms possible. And it did. And it was a broad enough overview, but I could have talked conversationally about it. It helped me create mental models to better understand and remember key concept in Newton's laws of motion. So it's really interesting. So Dr. Loving put in the question in the chat that if ChatGPT is giving incorrect information, why would I use it if I'm a tutor? We're not saying it's giving incorrect information. We're just saying it's not always giving the correct information. And if you have the correct information readily available to you, then sure, absolutely use it. But that's not always the case. And so that's where these tools can be helpful. It's a tool like a textbook. If I don't have the knowledge in my brain, I could use a textbook. I could use Google, and we do pretty often. And so this is another tool that you can use very similarly to Google, but also knowing that just because I Google it, not everything I see is going to be accurate. So you have to train people how to use it. So we make sure that they are thinking about the information that's being given to them for sure. Incredibly important to distinguish between the different versions of ChatGPT. Yes. There are paid versions and there are free versions and there are multiple versions and some better than others. So I think that is a very, very good point. Sydney, go ahead.
On that same note, it's important to know that ChatGPT isn't the only AI program. Programs like Symbol Lab and Wolfram Alpha are two mathematical AI programs. And those are fairly accurate. In fact, many of my students and tutors use Symbol Lab and Wolfram Alpha on a daily basis. And a lot of these students are recognizing that too. You can type into Google, like, what's the best AI program for writing an essay or solving a math program? And it'll come up with a list of different ones. So where ChatGPT might not be accurate for mathematics, per se, there are lots of other programs that can do that. And some are paid, some are free. Wolfram Alpha and Symbol Lab are both two that have free versions and paid versions, depending on what you want. But that's just an example. So part of that training process would be learning how to use which AI program or when to use which AI program.
And AI programs aren't wholly new either. How long has what is it, Photomath? The app where you can take a picture and it like does it and shows you the steps they had. And so this isn't all new, it's just becoming a larger conversation. Marshall, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me? Perfect. I'm curious because we were talking about reliability earlier. So I'm wondering to what extent are we satisfied that ChatGPT or another, AI has created something that just appears to be what it claims it is? I mean, how confident are we that it's actually made a study guide and not just something that looks like a study guide to someone who's not a master of this subject? And then if we have to verify that information against actual reliable information, I don't understand the utility of this process, I suppose.
Well, let me share an example. What's your background in? What's your area of expertise?
Journalism and copy editing.
All right, so give me an example of a potential study guide you would need to create in your field of study.
I don't
English classes.
know that journalism, especially as an industry, that study guides are helpful for.
So I'll go ahead and share the Newton's Law one.
Awesome.
So help me create mental models to better understand and remember key concept in Newton's laws of motion. So I'm putting it up here. I'll do a little bit of reading for anybody who cannot see the visuals. So first law of inertia, mental model. Imagine a stationary object on a frictionless surface. It will stay at rest unless acted upon by an external force, and a moving object will continue moving at a constant velocity unless acted upon by a force. Visualization. Picture a car at rest on an ice rink. It won't move until another car pushes it. And if a moving car suddenly stops, the passengers will continue moving forward due to inertia. That explained it in a way that, do I understand the law of inertia? Vaguely, I learned about it. That explained it way better than I ever could.
But we're just trusting that it explained it correctly. Unless we go verify it with a source that we already trust and has a reputation, then we're just assuming that this has given us correct information.
Absolutely. Yes, you are.
Okay.
And sometimes you shouldn't always make that assumption, and that's where training goes into it. Just like anything on the internet, you should never assume it's accurate.
But there are certainly organizations on the internet that have built up reputations where they are trustworthy. And if this is creating out of whole cloth from other pieces that are already on the internet, I feel like it's taken what was credible information, chopped it up and glued it back together in a way that I'm meant to just take for granted that this is reasonable and helpful.
It is never asking you to do that. ChatGPT is not asking you to trust it. If anything, ChatGPT is often telling you this could be inaccurate. We are using AI.
Excellent. So
ChatGPT does not know what trust is. ChatGPT is artificial intelligence.
agreed.
And so-
I would even argue that it's not intelligence at all. It's just an algorithm. But
Absolutely.
I feel like that, yeah, it is telling us structurally that it's not trustworthy to assemble this information. So I am worried about specifically the study guide example seems troublesome for tutoring for me. But
And
I don't
that's
want to
where-
bog down the conversation here if there are other places we'd like to go.
But I do think it's important to discuss because, but that is where I'm not going to create a math study guide when math is not my forte. What if a math tutor is using ChatGPT to create a math study guide and they have a basic understanding of math and can look at it and say, oh, that actually did a pretty good job. I had to do minor editing. Then it just saved them potentially hours because creating a study guide could take hours. Whereas doing quick edits or fact checking on a subject you're already pretty well versed in isn't going to take you that long. For example, writing a resume. Like I said, it's not 100% accurate, but it gave me a starting point that I can pretty quickly edit rather than staring at a blank page and starting completely from scratch. And so again, I think it's this idea that we are supposed to wholly trust ChatGPT as factual. No one is ever saying you are. You should never trust. I mean, honestly, I don't trust anything as being fully factual ever. A person, anything on the internet, I don't care how reliable the source is. That's a lot of trust to put in anything. So I think there are a lot of really interesting discussions to have about it philosophically. But also the reality is it's here. And so how do we embrace it or do we say, no, this isn't allowed? Sydney.
So maybe instructing students and tutors not to focus on broader concepts of creating study guides, but it might be super helpful because of, like you said, if you're new to the concept, you're not going to know what's correct and what's incorrect. But what can help is creating, like I put in the chat, recall association. So say, can you help me do a recall association of the order of operations? We all know PEMDAS is a pretty good one, but say they want to create something new, or say there's something that they're trying to study that doesn't already have a well-known recall association, using ChatGPT might be able to help. It adds the creativity. It takes away the need for creativity when you're really stressed about just trying to remember that specific concept. I know personally, I'm a math brain. I can't stand having to do like super creative concepts and stuff like that, artsy projects. That was never really my thing. So I really struggled with recall association. I could see ChatGPT or another AI model helping me generate something to help me remember a concept when I'm trying to memorize it. Does that kind of make sense? On maybe an alternative method of, instead of trusting a study guide to be truthful, using it more of a tool to generate something new specifically for a smaller concept.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. Someone in the chat also mentioned that ChatGPT may create a study guide that does not focus on the concepts that a particular instructor might stress in their course. Absolutely. So that's another area of, if we discuss this with students and how to responsibly use it, we can keep them from going astray. Like Laura just said, you can put the learning objectives written by the instructor. You can have them look at the study guide and look at the syllabus and go, oh, wait, it's telling me to study these things that we're not studying. And so you have to have, you cannot blindly go in and just say, teach me linear algebra, ChatGPT, and then expect it to do so and make you be successful. But if you teach students how they can use it, then this potentially could be a really wonderful tool. Like, I know nothing about linear algebra, so please, if anyone does and they see something totally inaccurate, what a wonderful opportunity to show that ChatGPT isn't totally accurate. But I just put create a study plan that mixes different topics with linear algebra to help me develop a more robust understanding. And it gave me a study plan for linear algebra that could be good, could not be. No idea. I think it's a good starting point, though. Better than I could do on my own. Anyone else have any ideas about how this could be leveraged to help students learn or within your learning centers or? And Ebony, yeah.
Sorry, I had to unmute. I am curious to see folks from learning centers and in education in general do some prompt engineering and share those resources with other educators so that they can play around with these prompts, because I think what students are going to look to us to support them in is exactly that, prompt engineering, to get the best, most accurate results out of a tool that, as we are discussing, is not perfect. One way to tweak the learning, we're talking about doing a learning plan here. One way to tweak it to make it more reliable would say, ChatGPT, create me a learning plan around online resources. So it's going to link you to actual online resources. Now, then, if you've got a student that has some foundational understanding of what a reliable source versus an unreliable source is, and also too, if it just makes something up and generates a broken link that goes nowhere, it's going to be more apparent for someone who is not as familiar with the subject as to where the holes are in the learning plan. So, rather than having it just straight up generate a learning plan, if you tie that to online resources, you're really just doing an efficient Google search that is going to pull you a lot of things into one place and give you some suggestions on how long and what the timeline is for that, which can be a really efficient way. But it's interesting because we're throwing around words like the Feynman technique, Pareto principle is another one, mental models, analogies, project ideas. These are all prompt engineering, and they're great keywords that we're throwing around today. And it would just be interesting to see someone start to compile those into an infographic or whatever to kind of help start guiding us as a profession. So what I encourage people to do is start to be prompt engineers and find out what is going to work to make the tool more accurate, because that's the thing. When we control the prompt, we have some, not all, but some more control over how accurate the tool is going to be by putting those parameters in place. Like students are saying, right? Like it doesn't work sometimes the first time, but usually the second time. So sometimes you have to tweak your prompts. So that was just my take.
Absolutely. And that is another area where I think it's really necessary for students to be informed how to use it well. If a student goes to ChatGPT and says, teach me algebra, they're not going to be super effective, right? Yeah, Travis.
All right, you said what I was about to say. Like, I think it lends itself to in terms of how do we in learning centers use it. I think it lends, what we're saying seems to lend towards a list of good advice and bad advice. Like good advice, tell me about some of the most credible sources in an area that I might read. Bad advice, can you write my whole essay for me? And then I'll paste it into Microsoft. Good advice, can you help me create a study plan? It's like, because that's always what I'm interested in, is like, okay, this tool exists. How does it apply to good tutoring practice?
Absolutely. I think that's a really great question, and probably where we're all sitting right now is going, all right, how can I use this for good instead of evil. Right? Or teach students how to use this for good instead of evil.
Oh, so maybe possibly I wasn't thinking of good versus evil. I was thinking of good practice versus good tutoring. Sorry, tutoring well versus tutoring badly.
Yeah.
But maybe also good and evil.
I very much was just being funny with the good versus evil, but how do you use it responsibly and well versus how can you use it in a way that's probably antithetical to learning, and or going to give you inaccurate information. Yeah, ineffectiveness versus effectiveness. I think there are ways that we can probably have discussions about helping students harness this responsibly in a way that will help them versus them learn. It's one of those things where, like, do we want to teach them how to use it, or do we want them to learn it on the streets, and possibly learn it irresponsibly? So, be given a lot of topics. Yeah, Joshua.
One of the things that I've noticed about tinkering with ChatGPT is that a lot of times the answer you get out of it is directly tied to the questions you ask it. And I think that our young people today don't know how to ask questions. Algorithms have fed them things all their lives, or their parents or their teachers, whoever. They've just been fed everything their whole lives, and so they don't know how to ask questions. And so one of the things that I've tried to do is use it as a tool to teach how to ask better questions. And ultimately, if you can kind of get them going down this train of thought of asking questions, then maybe you can get them to existentially ask, well, where does the ultimate end of this occur? Where does it lie? What does it do? And I know that's going way deep down the philosophical weeds, but that's generally where I live. So for me, using it as a tool to get them to think about questions rather than answers is a way to kind of be subversive about the whole question of ChatGPT, AI, technology. I'm a Neil Postman fanatic, so I'm always critiquing what technology is doing to our brain. But anyway, use it to ask questions. That was my throw out.
But I think you hit the nail on the head. This is one way that we can use it, because we have a student, like, how often do we have a student come in and they say, I need help with algebra? And we'll say, okay, great. What do you need help with? Learning it. Okay, and so we have to continue to ask questions of that student to get them to articulate where they are really struggling. When we can finally get to, I'm struggling with solving linear equations. Great, now we have a starting point. And so we are trying to get them to figure out how to ask the questions and in a way that is a safe space to go, okay, like I literally went into ChatGPT and said, teach me algebra. And I didn't get what I needed out of that. But then I can ask follow-up questions and I can keep digging. And eventually that'll lead me to being able to ask questions that are thorough and also hopefully critically evaluate the answers that are given to me. And that's actually really powerful and something that I think, like you mentioned, is kind of a lost art, because we can write 4-word sentences in Google and get worlds of information. We as a society aren't always the best at asking great questions, because information is kind of fed to us instead of us having to seek it. So yeah, it's a really interesting way of how can we teach students then how to frame questions to get what they need from these tools. And that can be done not just within ChatGPT, but teaching them how to Google well. It's a valuable skill.
And I think you demonstrated a good use of question refinement just now when you said, teach me algebra, and then it'll spit out a bunch of information, some of which might be useful. Like I bet ChatGPT knows what a variable is and that they're often represented by letters. So if I know literally 0 things about algebra, then I could learn something. But then I'm left with a more refined question. Like, what do I know a few things about algebra where a few minutes ago I knew 0. So what else do I need to know?
Absolutely. And so it can help students narrow down what they need help with. It can help give them what it has, and then they can say, all right, I guess I don't need to learn algebra. I needed to learn more about solving systems of equations. And then I can say, teach me to solve systems of equations. And it'll give me information. And potentially multiple methods, and that's pretty cool too. And so this is another way it can be used for tutoring, in that I'm trying to help a student, and I am showing them the way I was taught how to solve. But I'm struggling coming up with another way, and this isn't clicking for them. So this is a way that a tutor could say, show me another method for solving this. And maybe ChatGPT can come up with another method that'll work, and they can test it out together and check for the accuracy. And this is using ChatGPT in a way that uses it critically, that makes sure that we're not just taking it for face value, but also was a tool that helped a tutor who's maybe drawing a blank on another way to explain something. And I do appreciate at the end, remember to always check your solution by substituting the values and the variables back into the original equations to ensure they satisfy all the equations in the system. It's not telling you to trust it. It's telling you to double check the work. We've got about 10 minutes left. Does anyone else have any burning questions or thoughts or concerns or anything? This is a really interesting conversation.
I didn't raise my hand, but I can see this being beneficial for tutors who have, so like we have a lot of math tutors, we're in engineering school. And so you have faculty that will work a problem a certain way. So the tutor learned it one way, but then the student that they're trying to help, their faculty member wants them to do it a completely different way. So this would be very beneficial for them, because then they could just look up, hey, this is the method they're using. How do I use, how do I explain this? And it would be easier for them to explain.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know.
What's a good way to recognize a chat written essay?
Great question.
I was gonna actually speak to that just a little bit. In our tutoring program, a lot of folks, we have some questions that people submit that we ask people to answer when they're applying for the job. And something that we've done is we've actually input all of our interview questions into ChatGPT, right? Just to see how what might be a typical response. So if you're using prompts for essays, right, potentially put it in the prompt into ChatGPT and see what it spits out for you. If you have interview questions, put those in there and see what ChatGPT spits out. Maybe ask it a few different ways, maybe ask them follow-up questions. And using that, some people have used it to build rubrics for themselves. Some people have used it just to see and make sure that folks aren't putting into their applications or things that come directly from ChatGPT as well. And this helped us have deeper conversations about our application process, as well as how we are scoring things too.
I'll add to that, Inez, your question about how do you recognize it. One of the things, if you've never played with it, play with it enough and you'll start seeing that much of the material coming out of it is kind of, it lacks humanity. It's just information. When people start using certain language about it, it's not a salient agent. It's not, there's nothing human about it. And you can really see that in the responses. Also, one of the ways that many like Turnitin.com and a few other places are trying to break ChatGPT or some of these AI models, or not AI, but language learning models, is they're feeding it prompts repeatedly, and then they're sourcing those prompts to their plagiarism detectors, so that when students go in and get a prompt or something written by a ChatGPT, then when it gets plugged into Turnitin.com has a bank of those sources or that literature that's already there. It's learned that, and it says, hey, this is written by a bot, because it's basically plagiarizing everything that we've got already. So that's how many of these places are basically breaking or subverting the AI, is that they're feeding it prompts that the AI wrote. So that's something to think about.
One way that it was just kind of a best practice, generally speaking, when I was teaching freshman English, was one of the best ways you can find plagiarism is when you're like, I heard that student talk in class. This isn't the same. And so, especially if it's students that you're teaching and you're getting to know them, you're getting to know their voice. And then you get something written by ChatGPT. And like Joshua said, it's emotionless, it's often cold, it's often very, and it even says it has a natural language patterns. It's very consistent in style and tone, like crazily. So, and so it's missing the human piece. And if you're getting to know a student, I think that'll be really easy to see. Yeah, Jamie.
So returning to the question of how do you know if something was written by AI, my short answer to this, and from all of my colleagues here at Suffolk that I work with on this, is you can't. There's no way to know. The AI detectors that exist online, GPT-0, the others, they produce what is now notoriously incorrect results. In my own experiments, I had ChatGPT write a paragraph for me. I took that paragraph, fed it into Quillbot, which is a paraphraser. And so basically I took the AI generated paragraph, had it paraphrased by AI, put it into GPT-0, and it said 100% this was written by a human. And so there is no way to know. However, I think ultimately the root of the question is what does assessment look like now? How do we know if for example, in writing, how do I know if my students are developing their writing skills, and how can I see like what they can do by themselves? And I think you have to do your assessments in class. So I think one of the things that we're going to see, and one of the things that I'm going to be bringing back into my first year writing class, is pen and paper. And let me see what you can produce with just yourself and a pen and paper, and let's see what that is. And then let's think about, okay, what's the difference between that and what you can produce with all of the assists from AI language models and other things. So I think we're going to see a lot of folks moving to the flipped classroom model. I think we're going to have to do that, to where students are, watching lectures online on their own, and then they come to class and they just practice, where we can supervise exactly what they're doing, so that we can watch and make sure that they're developing the skills that we want them to develop. Because ultimately, if you're doing assessment the old way of just looking at the finished product, you're never going to know if it was produced by AI, and you may end up being in the situation where you have this. I think there's a professor in Texas right now that failed like 60% of his class because the AI detectors said the papers were written by AI, but that's just because the detector was wrong, not because the students actually did that. And also, I don't buy a word about Turnitin's propaganda that they're going to be able to catch this stuff. That is fantasy land, and that is just them trying to sell more site licenses. The thing about the reason why they're never going to be able to catch it is because all of these AIs are constantly learning and evolving. and they're always getting better, and they're always, and every input, it's creating new ways of phrasing things. It's learning new ways of creating more original sounding writing. People are getting better at creating prompts that will create more stylized writing. It's just like they're just constantly learning and getting better. Like even just the improvements in ChatGPT, just the 3.5 version between November when GPT-3 came out and now, it's learning, it's teaching itself in such an exponential way. I do not believe, I am not a supporter of the plagiarism checking industrial complex, but I do not think they have the technology to do it, no matter what they say.
I agree with you. Because as soon as they develop that technology, then more technologies will be created to evade those technologies. That will be smart. Like ChatGPT is just a little bit farther ahead. Turn it in. Sorry. And I agree with you. I think there's going to be a lot of returns to like good old fashioned writing conferences where you have to talk to your professor about your essay and prove that like you are actually thinking about it, or drafts or outlines or all of these things that often are not a part of writing anymore. Like we might ask for portfolios rather than just a finished product. So I can see from outline to end all of the different versions we produced, or a narrative reflection about your process of finding sources and how that went for you and your editing. Like there are so many different ways that are just, yeah, we have to think creatively about it. We have 2 minutes left, and I'm kind of debating whether or not. So here's my question that's in my brain, and I might make you all as uncomfortable as me with the question, and I think I might be okay with it because then maybe we can come back and have another conversation. So here's my question, and I'm saying this with no real answer. I used to be a writing professor, and I would give my students prompts. And so if a student successfully completed the prompt and did so well and in a way that I could not tell whether or not it was AI generated, does it matter? If they were able to successfully complete the assignment, does it matter? That's the answer, and it's keeping me up at night a little bit. I'm not gonna lie to you.
So can I just chime into the answer? Completing the assignment is not the goal. The goal is learning.
Oh, absolutely. But does it matter for the assignment?
That's what I'm saying. Like the assignment itself is just a means to an end. And if we're saying like, oh, it's okay if they just generate something from ChatGPT, then there was no learning that occurred. Or very little learning.
That there was no learning. Or did they learn successfully how to create a prompt that got them and then edited and thought critically about said prompt and were able to justify the sources? Like I'm saying, they checked all the boxes to verify the data, make sure it was all grammatically sound and correct, and did all of these things. Was that still not learning?
It wasn't my learning outcomes. I'll leave it at that.
But I think that's an interesting question. Are learning outcomes still necessary? Do we need to update our learning outcomes?
I think this is the philosophical question of process versus product. I mean, in the American education system, predominantly, we have prioritized the product, consumerism, production, that kind of thing for decades. And our students just want the product. They want the grade, they want the diploma, they want the degree, they want the job to get some money. And I think that ultimately that's kind of where we are epistemically or from a learning perspective. It's not about learning to our students, but we've kind of done that to ourselves where we rubricize and overly, in my opinion, we make everything about the product, the grade, the diploma, whatever, and not the learning and we get what we sow.
I agree. And that I would love to go back to a higher education where I can just take classes for the love of learning and not with a means to an end to create a paycheck that is sustainable. But is that the higher education that we have anymore? It's an interesting question. And one that I'm seeing a lot of people struggle with. I feel like, well, how can I fail them for this assignment when they technically did the assignment? We can. But how can we? But then how do we prove learning? If not through the assignments that they still successfully completed. It's a challenge, for sure. Writing 5 exclamation point. I don't actually know your name.
Yeah, my apologies. My name is Lindsay Sixard. And I don't have a good answer to your question. But I think we're going to see a lot more labor-based grading, because it's going to be how they spend their time rather than what they do.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Yeah, Travis and Sydney. Free for
I'm
all.
putting a do and don't list in the chat. If y'all could add to, respond to, disagree with it.
What we're also already seeing, as far as focusing on product versus process, we're already seeing a lot of grading systems that are coming through to alleviate that issue, because plagiarism on essays or having somebody else in general, having AI write it is the same in theory as paying another classmate to write your paper for you. And that's always been a problem. And so we're seeing already systems being put in place where instructors are having you turn in a first draft, a second draft, multiple parts of a paper to get you to actually prove that you wrote it yourself. Because honestly, that gets expensive if you're paying another student to write out 4 or 5 drafts of the same paper, for example, where ChatGPT can do it for free. So we're already seeing examples of instructors adapting to that situation. And I think ChatGPT is just going to push that forward faster. We're going to see a lot of faculty members have to adjust their teaching methods to a more, instead of a lecture-based style, to more of an active learning style of education, which we should know by now is already more effective than lecture-based styles anyway, as far as it comes to learning. So as far as the fear of this affecting the way educators teach and how we approach education, I think it's going to push us in the right direction. In that it's going to push us to break those boundaries of having a lecture hall style only classroom and having us be in a situation where students it's putting us in a situation we're going to have to make students actively engage in the classroom instead of just sitting there and listening to their educators speak.
Which frankly, don't mind it, that's the outcome of that. So Travis, I really love the question that you posed here of having a do and a don't and having a space to collaborate with this. I think I'm going to create a Google Doc and copy and paste what you put in there and share it with the video, maybe people can collaborate on it. Are you okay with that?
Absolutely. Share away.
And maybe we can just kind of, I don't know, mind meld a little bit and throw ideas out there, because I really do think this potentially has great power to help students learn, to help us in our learning centers, to help it be a tool for learning. But with great power comes great responsibility, and we kind of have to be in front of it, or the students are going to beat us to it. That's great, Laura. Yes. We appreciate all the sharing. I'll also share, we did a panel discussion and our director of our writing center here at GVSU actually spoke about ChatGPT and had a lot of really great things to say. So I might paste a link to that in the Google Doc as well, if anyone just wants to listen to Pat talk about it. It was a really interesting conversation. But as a university, we have said that we don't count ChatGPT as plagiarism necessarily blanketly. And it was an interesting stance to take. But yeah, it's kind of, we're at an interesting time. And I choose to say, this could be really cool. So I will share the Google Doc with everyone. And if there's interest in having a follow-up discussion, maybe I'll send out some feelers on that and we can do this again sometime in June. All right, thanks everyone. Take care. And I will talk to you all hopefully very soon.